Have you ever thought your life was perfectly fine, only to have it shattered in a single moment? After 12 years of marriage, I thought I had it all figured out. But one phone call changed everything. My wife, the woman I trusted, was cheating on me with a man who turned out to be a violent criminal. The affair was just the beginning of the nightmare. Emotional abuse, a near-death attack, and a hidden addiction followed. But in the midst of all that pain, I found strength. This is a story about betrayal, heartbreak, and the journey to rebuild a life for me and my son. It was just another ordinary day, or at least I thought so. 12 years of marriage, an 11-year-old son. I believed everything was stable. Then the phone rang. A call from the police, asking me to come down to the station, turned my world upside down. What could possibly be wrong? But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover. My wife, the woman I had shared my life with, was cheating on me with a co-worker. The news hit me like a truck. What could have possibly led her to such a decision? What could have been so stimulating? When I got to the station, I could barely comprehend the words. The police showed me a video, grainy but unmistakable. There she was, my wife, laughing, intimate with a man I had never seen before. Each second of that footage shattered another piece of the life I thought we had. Their satisfaction was painfully clear, their intention obvious. How had I missed the signs? Was I that blind? It was like watching someone else's nightmare, but it was mine. I could barely breathe. As if the affair itself wasn't enough, there was more. The police explained that the lover had been attacked, brutally beaten, violated, and set on fire. He was found in critical condition, clinging to life. And now, the authorities were looking at me, wondering if there was a connection between this violent attack and my wife's betrayal. The line between devastation and panic blurred as I tried to grasp what this meant for me, for my family. The weight of the situation hit me hard at the station, and I could feel my heart pounding as if it might burst. My hands were shaking, my breath shallow. Panic was setting in. The officers were saying something about the attack on my wife's lover, implying that it could be connected to me. The suggestion was absurd, but the fear gnawed at me. I couldn't focus. My mind was spinning out of control, and before I knew it, I was on the floor, gasping for air, unable to hold back the tidal wave of emotions crashing down. They urged me to leave my home, at least for a while. They said it was for my safety, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they didn't trust me. Could I be a suspect? My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. I couldn't risk staying at the house, not with my son there. The chaos, the tension, it wasn't safe anymore. So I decided to pack up and take him to my parents. I wasn't thinking straight, but I knew one thing. Protecting my son was now my top priority. We left that same night, my mind still spinning, my heart heavy. My son asked why we had to leave, and I fumbled for an explanation that wouldn't scare him. But how could I explain what I barely understood myself? The police's advice weighed heavily on me. But the real question that haunted me was, what comes next? Would I ever feel safe again? Or was this just the beginning of an unraveling I couldn't stop? The next morning, still reeling from the night before, I knew I needed help. A lawyer was the only person who could give me some sense of control. Sitting in his office, I felt like I was drowning, desperate for a lifeline. We discussed the situation, and his calmness brought some clarity. He suggested filing for an emergency custody order to protect not just myself, but my son and my parents as well. It felt strange taking such drastic steps, but it was necessary. I couldn't take any chances, not now. Thankfully, the order was granted quickly. I was relieved, but far from at ease. I kept replaying the events over and over in my head. My wife was still in a psychiatric facility, and from what I understood, she hadn't even tried to reach out to me. Part of me felt a strange sense of peace in her silence, but another part of me was left wondering what was going on in her mind. The woman I thought I knew, who was she now? And why did she do this? Was there any explanation that could justify the damage she caused? I felt protected, sure, but the questions kept swirling. Every step I took felt like I was walking on broken glass, unsure if the next step would cut deeper. I had to be careful. The legal side was being handled, But the emotional fallout? That was an entirely different battle. And I had no idea how long it would take to feel even remotely normal again. As the days passed, I tried to keep things normal for my son, but the cracks were starting to show. He had been quiet, too quiet, since we left the house. One night, while sitting together, I gently asked him if he wanted to talk. What he revealed shook me more than anything that had happened so far. He told me that his mother, the same woman I had once trusted completely, had been emotionally abusive to him when I wasn't around. The words hit like a punch to the gut. How had I not seen this? He explained how he was scared to tell me, afraid she might take him away if he did. My heart broke all over again, not just for what he had been through, but for the fear that had kept him silent. It was a kind of betrayal I hadn't even considered, and it left me reeling. I had been so focused on the affair, on my own pain, that I hadn't realized my son was suffering right in front of me. The guilt was suffocating more than I could bear. How had I missed the signs? His confession changed everything. The affair seemed almost insignificant compared to the damage she had done to him. My focus shifted immediately. I wasn't just a husband who had been wronged. I was a father who had failed to protect his child. That thought consumed me. And now, more than ever, I knew things could never go back to the way they were. The marriage was over, but what I needed to rebuild now was my son's trust and my own strength to move forward. After that conversation with my son, I knew I had to do something to help him heal. The damage was deeper than I had imagined, and I wasn't equipped to handle it alone. So, I reached out for professional help and got him into therapy. It felt like the right step, even though part of me wondered if it would be enough. I wanted him to feel safe, to regain the confidence that had been stripped away. Each session brought a glimmer of hope, but it was clear the road to recovery would be long. I tried to be there for him in ways I hadn't been before. We spent more time together, and I made a point to teach him how to handle situations that made him feel uncomfortable or unsafe. I wanted him to know he could always ask for help, that he wasn't alone. The independence I saw starting to grow in him gave me a small sense of satisfaction, but it was bittersweet. This wasn't how I wanted him to learn those lessons, but it was necessary, and I had to believe that these small victories were steps toward something better. Even as he started to heal, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The guilt of not protecting him sooner gnawed at me, but I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on that. I had to stay strong for him, even when it felt impossible. Every day was a mix of frustration and hope. Hope that we could both come out of this stronger, and frustration at how long the process was taking. But at least now, I knew we were moving in the right direction. It wasn't long before her parents reached out. I had expected some kind of response from them, but when they asked to meet, I wasn't sure what to feel. Part of me didn't want to face them, didn't want to revisit the pain that their daughter had caused. But I owed it to my son to keep that connection open, however fragile it now seemed. So we met. Their faces were lined with shock and regret, and they immediately apologized, as if they somehow carried the weight of her actions. But could an apology really fix any of this? They claimed they had no idea what she had been going through, no idea about the affair or the emotional abuse. I wanted to believe them, but trust was something I wasn't ready to give. Still, I could see the pain in their eyes. They were suffering too, in their own way. We talked about my son, about how he needed them, despite everything. It was hard to separate their relationship with him from what had happened between her and me, but for his sake, I knew I had to try. Yet, the bond between us felt different now, strained, as if an invisible barrier had been erected. Walking away from that meeting, I felt conflicted. There was no satisfaction in their apologies, no real comfort in their words, but I could tell they meant well. Maybe in time, our relationship would recover, or maybe it would never be the same. Either way, I knew I had to put my son's needs first. They were his grandparents, after all. I just wasn't sure how much more loss we could all bear. As more details about the affair surfaced, another bombshell dropped. It turned out that the man my wife had been involved with wasn't just some random coworker. He had a criminal record, a past filled with drug trafficking and gang affiliations. The revelation left me in shock. How could she have been involved with someone like that? What was she thinking? I tried to make sense of it, but the more I learned, the less it made sense. It felt like every new detail, just pushed me deeper into a pit of confusion. Apparently, he was out on parole when their affair began, living under the radar until the attack that nearly killed him. It was all so reckless. My wife's choices now seemed even more dangerous, not just for her, but for our family. The fact that this man was still in the hospital, clinging to life, didn't offer much relief either. It was hard to feel any sympathy for him, though. He destroyed my marriage, but at the same time, I was haunted by how everything had spiraled out of control. Now I couldn't help but wonder if she had known about his past. Had she been using him for something? Or was she simply blind to the danger he represented? The idea that this man had brought so much chaos into our lives, it was infuriating. And while he lay in that hospital bed, fighting for his life, I was left fighting to put the pieces of mine back together. As the dust began to settle, it became clear that divorce was the only path forward. There was no coming back from this. My lawyer had already started preparing the paperwork when he reminded me of something I had almost forgotten: the prenuptial agreement. At the time we got married, I hadn't given it much thought, but now it felt like a lifeline. The prenup would protect everything I had worked for, keeping my assets secure, and, most importantly, preventing her from claiming any kind of spousal support. It was one small piece of relief in an otherwise chaotic situation. When her lawyer learned about the prenup, the look of surprise was almost satisfying. They probably thought this divorce would be easy money for her, but that agreement had changed everything. She wouldn't be able to walk away with my hard-earned income, and that brought some level of satisfaction, even though it didn't make the pain go away. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about taking control back, about setting boundaries and refusing to let her continue to hurt me or my son. I was finally starting to feel like I had some power in all of this. Even though the legal side seemed to be in my favor, the emotional weight of it all still lingered. Signing those papers wouldn't erase the memories or undo the damage, but it was a step toward closing this painful chapter. I had to remind myself that the divorce wasn't just an ending. It was a necessary step toward healing, toward rebuilding a life for me and my son without the weight of her betrayal holding us back. Out of nowhere, a letter arrived from her. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what to expect. In it, she confessed that her downward spiral had started after a surgery she had a few years ago. Apparently, she had begun abusing prescription painkillers, and it was this addiction that had driven her into the arms of that man. He wasn't just her lover. He had been supplying her with drugs. She begged for a second chance, claiming that she was ready to enter rehab and change for the sake of our family. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to believe that this was her taking responsibility, finally facing the consequences of her actions. But after everything she had put us through, could I trust her intentions? Was this just another attempt to manipulate me, to pull me back into the chaos? She said she was sorry, that the drugs had clouded her judgment, but I couldn't forget the emotional abuse my son had suffered. No amount of rehabilitation could erase that damage. Still, the idea of her getting help, of her taking a step toward being a better person, felt like it had to count for something. But as much as she asked for forgiveness, I knew that reconciliation wasn't an option. The marriage was over, and there was no going back. I told her that I wouldn't stand in the way of her recovery, but I made it clear there would be no second chances for us. If she wanted to get clean, she could, but it wouldn't change the fact that she had destroyed our family. For me and my son, moving on was the only choice we had left. The more time passed, the more the weight of everything sank in. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the betrayal, the lies, and the emotional wreckage left behind. I couldn't help but feel guilty, as if I should have seen the signs earlier, as if I could have stopped this before it spiraled out of control. The anger came in waves, crashing over me when I least expected it. But underneath that, there was a deep sadness, a sense of loss for the life we had built, and for the person I thought she was. How had it all fallen apart so quickly? I knew I couldn't let this consume me, though. I started therapy, hoping to work through the mess of emotions that I couldn't quite untangle on my own. Talking to someone helped, even if it didn't offer any immediate relief. It wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about learning how to live with it, how to move forward without letting the anger define me. I had to heal, not just for myself, but for my son. He needed me to be strong, to be the steady presence in his life that he could count on. But it wasn't easy. Every day felt like a battle between holding on to the past and letting go. Slowly, though, I began to accept that the marriage was truly over. The person I had loved was gone, or maybe she had never really been who I thought she was. Either way, I had to rebuild. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let this define the rest of my life. There was still hope, not just for recovery, but for a fresh start, one where my son and I could finally breathe again. With the divorce officially underway, it felt like the end of a long, painful chapter. I didn't expect to feel relief, but there it was, creeping in little by little. The weight I had been carrying, the confusion, the anger, the guilt, was starting to lift. It wasn't completely gone, but I could finally see a future beyond the chaos. My son was doing better too. He was finding his footing again, slowly regaining his confidence. That, more than anything, gave me hope. We were moving forward one day at a time, even if the road still felt rocky. The legal side of things was almost wrapped up, and the tension between us all had started to fade. She was still in rehab, and I had no plans to see her anytime soon. The space between us was necessary, not just for my own healing, but for my son's too. The relationship she once had with him was fractured, and I wasn't sure if it would ever be repaired. But at least we had some peace now, some distance from the constant upheaval. The end of this chapter felt like a new beginning, not perfect, but possible. Looking ahead, I know the scars will remain, but I also know that this experience doesn't have to define the rest of my life. My focus is on my son now, his well-being, his future, and making sure he feels safe and loved. That's what matters most. I've come to terms with the fact that, despite everything, there's always room for growth and healing. We'll both find our way. And while the pain may never fully disappear, the promise of something better lies just around the corner.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.